If you've been online in the last few years, you know this song, and you probably know the heartbreak that comes with it. Since Edge Runners came out, the genre has kinda exploded again. Everyone loves the aesthetic, the neon, the chrome, the tragedy. But I want to look past the vibes for a second. Because if you actually look at the design of these cities, have you noticed the future almost always look specifically East Asian? Go back to the grandfather of the genre, Blade Runner. It's 1982 and Ridley Scott imagines the future of Los Angeles. And what does he show us? Noodle bars, kanji everywhere. The streets feel more like Tokyo than California. Then you have Ghost in the Shell. The artist explicitly modeled the city after Hong Kong's Kowloon Royal City. But the real question is, why? Why did Western writers decide the future looks like this? It wasn't just because it looked cool, it actually started from a place of genuine economic anxiety in the 1980s. So, today, I want to unpack that history. We are going to trace how the future evolved starting from the fear of Japan in the 80s to how that influence is shifting in the modern day. To understand why Night City looks the way it does, we have to travel back to the 1980s. And we need to look at two very different realities. In the US, the 80s wasn't all synth-pop and parties. It was the era of the Rust Belt. American factories were closing. Crimes in cities like New York was at an all-time high. There was this genuine feeling that American Gold Age was over. But across the Pacific, Japan was living in the future. This was a bubble economy era. Tokyo was clean, high-tech, and incredibly wealthy. While America was rusting, Japan was glowing. Americans were terrified. There was a legitimate anxiety that Japan was going to economically conquer the West. They were buying Rockefeller Center, they were buying Columbia Pictures. People thought, if this continues, the future belongs to them, not us. And academics call this Techno-Orientalism. It's the idea that the West projected its fears onto Asia. They didn't see Japan as a real place with real people. They saw it as this cold, efficient, high-tech machine that was coming to replace them. So when William Gibson wrote Neuromancer or Ridley Scott made Blade Runner, they took that anxiety and turned it into a setting. And why are the villains in Cyberpunk always giant megacorporations? Because they were modeled after the Japanese Zaibatsu and Keiretsu, massive conglomerates that controlled everything from banking to construction. And in the cyberpunk world, the government is weak and the corporation is God. That is a dark reflection of the 1980s fear of Japan Inc. So, the neon lights, the constant rain, and the kanji signs, originally these weren't meant to be good. They were visual shorthand for a dystopian future where the West had lost and the East had taken over. But something funny happened over the last 40 years. That fear faded away. The Japanese bubble burst in the 90s, but the look stuck around. It became the default way we picture the future. And that brings us to the visual language of the city itself. So, we've talked about the history. Now, I want to talk explicitly about the visuals. Because Cyberpunk has very specific rule, high-tech, low-life. But how do you actually design a city looks like that? You go back to that place I mentioned in the intro, the Kowloon Royal City. Before it was demolished, this was the most densest place on Earth. It was an anomaly, a lawless block where buildings were stacked on top of buildings. It provides the structure of the cyberpunk city. It's messy, organic, and suffocating. But if the bones of the city are Hong Kong, the skin is definitely Tokyo, specifically the Kabukicho district. And it's not just because neon looks cool. It's about why lights are there. In Western cities, lights are for safety. However, in Cyberpunk and in Tokyo, the light is for advertising. And that's why the rain is so important in these movies. The rain isn't just the weather, it's a mirror. It reflects the corporate logos on the ground, so you can't escape the commercialism even when you look down. And finally, there's a verticality. This is the ultimate visual metaphor. In this genre, your social class is determined by your altitude. The rich live in the sunlight, the poor live in the permanent shadow of the skyscrapers. And for a long time, Japan was the perfect model for this mix of high-tech wonders and crushing social pressure. Recently, the cyberpunk reality has shifted. If you look at the world today, there is another country that embodies this high-tech, high-pressure, corporate-dominated aesthetic even more perfectly than modern Japan. And that brings us to the modern era. Influence is shifting from the Japan of the 80s to the Korea of now. So, how do we know the torch has been passed? First, you just have to look at the media itself. The default Asian future is starting to speak Korean. Let's take Cyberpunk 2077. The most powerful netrunner isn't a Japanese Arasaka agent anymore. It's Songbird, a Korean intelligence agent. Or look at Blade Runner 2049. In the background, or on the vending machines, or on the tech, you see Hangul. But why? Why are creators pivoting to Seoul for inspiration? It's not just pop culture popularity. It's because modern Korean society mirrors the cyberpunk themes almost perfectly. Let's start with the high-tech part, the corporations. As we talked about in cyberpunk lore, the world is run by megacorps that control everything. From the hospital you're born in, the apartment you live in, and to the phone you use. In Korea, we have the Chaebol. Companies like Samsung or Hyundai aren't just tech companies. They are pillars of the nation. The scale of their influence is exactly what Western sci-fi writers were imagining in the 80s, but it's real life here. And then there is the visual. If you walk through Gangnam or Hongdae at night, you don't need a set designer. The density of the neon, the massive LED facades, the 24-hour delivery culture. Seoul is the aesthetic. But the most important connection is the atmosphere. Remember, cyberpunk is a dystopia. It's about people struggling to survive in a hyper-competitive system. And this is where the Hell-Joseon discourse comes in. The intense competition for education, the pressure of the job market, the feeling of being a small cog in a giant machine. The sense of anxiety that tech is moving forward, but life is getting harder, is the core emotion of cyberpunk. And today, the emotion feels very distinctively Korean. So the genre didn't just swap Japanese kanji for Korean Hangul because it looked trendy. It shifted because Seoul has become the new capital of high-tech, high-pressure future. So where does that leave us? We started with the 1980s American anxiety about a Japan Inc. takeover. We moved through the aesthetic of Hong Kong and landed in the modern, digital reality of Seoul. What's fascinating is that this genre is a massive intercultural feedback loop. Western writers imagined a future based on the East, and the East built cities that matched that imagination. And now, Western games are looking back at those cities for new inspiration. Whether it's the corporate fears of the 80s or the hyper-competitive pressure of today, we use the cyberpunk aesthetic to process our real-world anxieties. It turns out the future doesn't belong to one culture. It's a reflection of whoever pushing the boundaries of technology and the price they pay for it.